you. Oh, he started. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Sorry about that. We've got some people that are unable to make the meeting today. So they asked me to record this to be able to send it to them later. And also I can send it to all of you so that we can have it to share with all of your coworkers and friends and anybody else who wants to learn about Sage Intacct for nonprofits. So can you give me the next slide, Jim? Okay, so Sage Intacct works with nonprofits just like you guys, and it's for Sage Intacct, they do 30% of their customers are already nonprofits. And what I love about this slide is that they have got goodwill. And I thought, there we go, Edwards Aquifer, which is one of our local customers here, promoting. It's one of our first Sage Intacct customers that we've had in San Antonio. So they've been with us for a while. But I love that there's so many other references that are on Sage Intacct that are nonprofits. So it's really their biggest part of their business. Yep. And then also another wonderful thing about Sage Intacct is that they are the only preferred provider by the AICPA. So that's really important when you're talking to accountants and other CPAs, that it has their seal of approval. And it is the only accounting system that has that. Okay, so here's another wonderful part of Sage Intacct. We talked about how it connects with other things. Most people have something connected into their system. So for Sage Intacct, you have, this is your CRM, you have ADP or Workforce Go, which is your payroll. You have automation over here. You have expense automation over here. So anything that you're trying to automate or put together and fit into the pieces, it has open API. So you're able to fit that all together into your system. And that way, everything can have one source of truth, which is really important. Okay, so here is something that I know Jim talks about all the time. And I think this is one of his favorite slides, talking about how Sage Intacct has reliability, security, and recovery. Now she says, I think you're muted. Can everybody hear us?
We can hear you, Stacy.
Okay, great. Thanks, Casey. So then uptime commitment, this is super important. 99.8% that they guarantee that you are going to be up all the time. Extra capacity, this is something where they talk about making sure that your server and that you have the room to grow. And we know that everybody starts smaller and then wants to have room to grow. And this is an important thing with Sage Intacct, that's unlimited, that's never a problem, having that room to grow your business and expand, that's a capacity they have. And if Jim, if I'm saying something incorrect, correct me.
Well, part of the gist of this it is the value proposition of the cloud solution. So you can't really just compare, okay, this software or the software that I already have is costing me this much a year, and Sage Intacct is going to cost me potentially more, maybe not. But some of the things you need to take into account is no servers. One, you don't have any servers, so you don't have to pay people to maintain those servers, back up those servers, secure those servers. I can't tell you how many Great Plains clients we've had get hit with ransomware over the last year. So you're getting world-class security that you couldn't provide yourself, because they've got just resources that the typical company can't afford. On the extra capacity, you'll see as I run reports, of course, now that I say this, it won't, but you can run extremely intensive reports and they come back like that, because rather than you being on a server that you own, you're in a pool of resources. And if you need to run a particularly intensive process, it can expand out to more processors, and most reports will generate almost instantly. Backups, some of our ransomware victims thought they had great backups. One in particular, very large, believe it or not, network company, have good backups. They got to start from scratch. All the data is stored in California in 2 redundant data centers. If one of the physical data centers gets destroyed, the other one will be online in an hour. So that's part of the proposition, is also the infrastructure. No client installs. All you need is a browser and a log and credentials, and you're in from your phone, from your home. Now, we can secure where you can do that from, but as part of the cloud proposition is getting out from under all of the hardware and services that surround it, and can't emphasize enough the security. All right.
So why nonprofits love Express? So now we've talked about why nonprofits love Sage Intacct. Now we're going to talk about why nonprofits love Express. We have over 3 decades of experience. Our average employee tenure is 15 plus years. I know many of you here have been with Express for a really long time. And if you look around the room, you can see that most of the consultants or staff has also been here as long as you've been here. So that relationship between Express and your company, your employees, that's really important to us because we want to know and we want to be there with you every step of the way. And when we say, you know, we've done over 600 software implementations and we're certified Sage Intacct specialists, that's really important to us. And it's really, I want you all to know how important it is that you have been with us. And I know that, or like the Jay has been with us for a really long time. Bayer's been with us for a really long time. So having those relationships is really important to us on that level. Culture, our consultants are awesome. We all know that. Cheryl, Jackie, Jim are here with us. And Cheryl, how long have you been here?
33 years.
33 years. Jim?
26.
26. I'm at 8 and I'm a newbie. So like it just goes to show that that tenure is really, really long. I'm family first. That's just how our culture is. And that's when we spoke over dinner when we were in Vegas, talked about how important that family culture is. They go to happy hours, you know, once a month on Friday night. We have happy hours here. We do things together, whether it's events or parties, but that's important, all part of that culture. You know, as a game, Iris is like, you need to go support him. Sophie's daughter has dance, you need to go support her. And so that's how our culture and why it's so important to us and why we have tenure in customers and consultants. So just, you know, a little insight to why we love what we do. Okay. And then I will let Jim take it away from here. If you have any questions at any time, we're going to ask you to put them in the chat. And then here we can save them to the end. And then Jim is happy to answer any questions for you at the end. But we're really thankful that you all joined us today. And I'm going to pass it over to Jim.
And before Jim gets started, if anyone in the chat has any issues with the audio, you can call me. I put my phone number in the chat and I can walk you through how to get that working.
Thanks, Casey. Do you feel like it's working well now?
It's working fine for me, but sometimes the speakers get muted on the people joining side, so I can help them fix that.
Understood. Thank you so much, Casey. Go ahead, Jim.
All right, thanks everybody. So today's event has been billed as nonprofits, and we are going to be showing you features that are particularly useful to nonprofits. But I know that some of you are not nonprofits, and I'm only going to be showing one small feature that is actually exclusively useful for nonprofits. So hopefully everybody will get something out of this. The bottom line, the reason that Sage Intacct did not set out to be a nonprofit program. What it set out to be is a financial solution with the best possible reporting. And that naturally caused nonprofits to gravitate toward Intacct because nonprofits typically have more intensive reporting requirements. In particular, you know, an account, a location, a department's not enough. You need to be able to isolate the grant or the fund, have the fund be in balance. Not everything, can't just have a balanced balance sheet, but I need a whole bunch of balanced grants or funds or whatever. So nonprofits naturally gravitated toward Intacct, which in turn prompted Intacct to start developing more nonprofit specific functionality. So it's been kind of a positive feedback loop. So most of what we're going to look at today are various flavors of reporting. Budget control has to do, I'm not going to talk about creating budgets, but rather making sure we don't exceed budgets, managing actuals to budgets. In a lot of fee-for-service nonprofits, you exceed a budget line, you essentially eat the money because you can't get reimbursed for it or funded for it. Managing restricted funds, that's the one thing that's really nonprofit specific, and that can be an extremely painful process for nonprofits who are big enough to have a lot of different restricted funds that need to be relieved every month. That can literally be turned into a batch process. Then automated allocations will be the final thing that we look at. There's a basic allocation functionality where you can pick a transaction and have it break out under some predefined percentages. But what this is a bulk month-end process to take one set of balances and allocate them to another set of accounts based on a third set of accounts. All right, so we're going to dive in here and move over to the product. All right, so first differentiator from a lot of older systems is the chart of accounts. And I know this is kind of small on the screen, but you can, if you see here in this particular case, you can set your account length to be any length that you want, up to I think 10 or 12. But it is not a segmented account. It is just the main or natural segment. So there's no salaries dash marketing, salaries dash sales, salaries dash operations, yada, 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 80 different versions of salaries to match up with all the other segments. It's just salaries. Then we mix and match that with other individual pick lists. So that in this particular environment, let me go over the navigation here a little bit first before I dive too far in. So I'm hovering over here, and these menus and screens are pretty busy. This is a demo environment, so it's got every possible bell and whistle that there is turned on. And I'm an administrator, so I see everything. If you have staff people who only have access to certain parts of the system or only certain functions within a menu, that's all that will appear. So the system won't be nearly as busy as this might look. So we've got our various modules down the left side, and we can select what we need here. You can see here that I've marked certain items with this favorite, which allows me to create a custom menu for myself across all of the modules with these favorites here. So I'm going to start by, I'm actually going to be using these shortcuts, which are actually have been largely replaced by these gold star favorites, but I'm going to use this to bookmark various places in the system. So in this particular environment, I've got, just looked at the chart of accounts. Now I've got a list of departments. So it's an individual pick list that is separate from the rest of the account. Likewise, my other dimensions such as my funds, again, are another separate list. What that allows me to do is, that's visually most easy to understand when we look at a transaction window. So this is a journal entry window, and you can see that my fund, save that, come back to it. So here's a journal entry window. You can see here that I've selected my account out of the chart of accounts, but then my fund, these dimensions is the term, what a lot of systems will call segment, account segments. Use the term dimension. You can put any name on these that you want. So for example, here on fund, this is typically called company or location. It's any business unit that you want to keep in balance. Department, project and grant, again, there's a screen where we assign the labels that we want to any of these. So you can see these are all individual pick lists. This is going to allow us to do reporting in kind of a pivoting type style where it's very easy to filter on any of these different segments. Now, keeping balanced funds. One of the things that nonprofits often need to do is have, rather than just a balance sheet, they need a balance sheet for every single fund, and they may have many of them. So take an example for here where I've got a general fund is paying expenses for other funds. So I'm going to change up this journal entry, and I'm just going to pick a couple of random funds here. So this is kind of the center of the magic of fund accounting here, and that is that I've got 3 lines here, and all 3 lines are in separate funds. So I'm going to be throwing 3 funds out of balance with this entry. To see when I save this and come back and look at it again, the system has balanced these entries. So we've got due to, due from to keep these various entities in balance. And that is because these 2 are actually part of the same fund. So if I come to here and save again, I should have 2 sets of due to, due from entries. Here we go. All right. So my general fund has spent money on behalf of these 2 funds. So these 2 funds have due tos to the general fund for reimbursement. That's a pretty common scenario. The system does that automatic in the background, whether you're keying the transaction, importing the transaction, no matter where the transaction comes from a third-party expense reporting system, AP automation. When it hits Intacct, it's going to balance it. Do you like it or not? Okay. So let's take a look at some reporting here. So for the rest of the presentation, I am going to be using dashboards to show you the reports that I want to show you to demonstrate various points. These dashboards are simply collections of reports that have been built elsewhere. So you can see that I've got a P&L here, a statement of revenues and expenditures, got a graph of my cash balances. These were all created elsewhere and just collected on this screen. The only thing that's unique, the only thing that's uniquely developed on a dashboard are these KPIs. And even these are actually plucked off of financial statements. So to create this G&A expense, I simply said, I want the G&A line off of my P&L, and I want to do a comparison to the prior month. And then if the number goes down, it's a good thing. So I have a green arrow. On this one, if the number goes up, it's a good thing. All of these reports are drillable, including, for instance, this is a month-over-month comparison. So if I want to see the color on these numbers, because I was comparing 2 periods, it's showing me both periods, the current and the previous month, so that I can get the 2 numbers that made up the difference. These numbers are drillable. I can drill down all the way down to the originating transaction. Show you another example of that. So if I come down, let's pop this statement out to make it easier to see. So I can pop any of these financial statements out. Now I have the view that I would have if I ran them independent of the dashboard. And let's go down to other expenses. I think it's other expenses, or maybe lodging here. So if I drill down to the first level, I get the journal entry that it came from. Then that's not the line I wanted. Most of this was imported. There should be, here it is, other expenses. That's the one. All right, so here's a general ledger that shows me the number, 1,379,000. That's the number I drilled on. So here's how the number was arrived at. If I drill down on an individual transaction, the first level of the drill down is the journal entry. So this was debit expense, credit AP. But I can keep going down to the document level, and I can see that this item came from accounts payable. I can drill further, he says. Of course, now things aren't going to run fast, but I can see here that this transaction has an attachment. Now it's going to respond. All right, so here's a read-only entry of the AP entry so that any user can come in and see the status of this report. They can come in and look at the audit trail to see who did it, who approved it, who's touched it. And they can view any attachments that are on it. So there can be an unlimited number of attachments on anything. Now, Sage has got a special kind of user called an employee user. They come in packs of 10 and they cost next to nothing. And it allows you to expose these dashboards and any other reports, including this drill down capability, to users who are not in the accounting system. So for instance, if you've got program managers and they're responsible for not exceeding budget, we can give them a dashboard that shows them where they are against budget at any point in time. Their access is read only, but you control where and what they can do the same way you do any other user. Screen by screen, action by action. You're just limited to the fact that they're read only. So it's a good way to roll information out to various stakeholders. Okay. Also, being a web-based application, I can duplicate this tab and be in the system as many times as I want. So maybe I want to look at G&A expenses here and look at something totally different here. There's no licensing implications, no matter how many screens you can keep straight at one time. All right, so we are on a dashboard that was designed for the controller. Okay, another good thing about these dashboards, particularly in the case where you have fund managers or program managers that you want to expose reports to, if I've got 10 different program managers and I only want them looking at their information, I don't want to maintain 10 different dashboards, 10 different sets of filters and security. These reports filter to the security of the person who opens the dashboard. So, for example, on this drill down, if I'm allowed to see the general ledger, but I don't have access to accounts payable, as I drill down, when I get to the GL level, that last step I took into AP won't work for them because they do not have access to accounts payable. You can also control whether users can drill down at all. Sometimes, like on payroll accounts, you might want them to see the whole number, but you don't want them to see the individual details. All right. Now, one of the things that Sage Intacct does that the competitors either don't do or don't do as well is on this dashboard right now, this is a real-time roll-up of about 10 funds and a dozen departments and dozens of programs. And everything about this is real-time. If I want to see information on a particular fund, for example, if I select this fund here and apply this, everything on this dashboard, with the exception of this list here, has refiltered to just Fund 401. Okay. Now, what we have here is this is a list of purchase orders that I need to approve. It has nothing to do with financial. Okay. But even here, if I open it, I am to approve these 4 items. If there's 8 items out there for Cheryl to approve, I don't see them. They're not directed to me. They're Cheryl's. If Cheryl opens this, she'll see the same reports, but she'll only see the items that she needs to approve. And again, these are all on the menus and other places, but particularly when you have those outside users or stakeholders coming in, you don't want to teach them how to navigate. Put it on a dashboard and have that be their world. So in here, what they've done is built some role-based dashboards. And again, if let's switch over to CFO dashboard. It's just another collection of various information. Here I've got a revenue analysis waterfall. Again, all of this is drillable down to the source documents. Okay, we talked about how in our coding, we're breaking the fields up into various dimensions. So I'm going to show you just how easy it is to parse information. So normally during demos, we don't create things on the fly, but I'm going to be brave here and I'm going to create a financial report from scratch. Okay, and what I'm going to do is, I don't want to bore you too much with the details, so I'm going to pick a predefined row layout. Change in net assets. So when I select this, this basically shows me what my rows are going to look like. And then my column assumes that I want current month. I want to make sure I get enough numbers. Let's do current year, and I'm going to set my date to 12/31/21. All right, an income statement. Great. So this gives me the what, but it doesn't give me the who or the where. So let's build this out a little bit more. I want to see where all of this information is happening. So I'm going to come back here and I'm going to tell this column to expand by fund. Right? So now same numbers, but spread across all of my funds in one click. As I add funds, they'll dynamically appear in the report without me having to update the fund because I just told it we'll get all funds. Now I could have said I can group these funds into federal versus local versus state and only get a certain subset and expand like that. Okay, so I can do that, for example. So I did that by fund, but remember we've got all those different dimensions. So let's do it by department. Spread by department. These happen to be by 990 categories. So I'm going to go back to spreading this by fund. All right. Now I want to know, all right, grant revenue. Where's my grant revenue? Who are my top grantors, funders for my grants? And maybe down in my expenses, where's all these salary expenses coming from? So I'm going to go back to edit the report, and I'm going to go over to the rows. I'm going to tell it that I want to see the grant broken out by where the money, who paid me. Okay. And on my payroll expenses, I want to see this by what department is generating all these expenses. All right, so now you can see that I've got my grant revenue is broken out by the individual people who paid me, and my personnel expenses are broken out by department. See where this is coming from. So the department's pretty straightforward, okay? So everything I code with a department, okay? But how do I get my grant revenue by customer? Okay, assuming that my grant revenue came from accounts receivable, how'd that get into the GL? Well, Intacct sends down everything on the invoice down to the GL detail. So if we go back to look at the first screen we looked at where we had a journal entry, you can see that I've got account, fund, department, but there are other dimensions here, such as vendor and customer. Where is customer? Oh, customer's already here. So my GL detail has a vendor ID and name for everything that came from accounts payable, and it has a customer ID and name for everything that came down through receivables. So that allows me to do all of my reporting, particularly my fund and grant reporting, using the general ledger without having to go back to the subsidiary modules to get revenue by customer. If I want to see revenue by customer, I don't run an AR report. I run a GL report filtered by customer. I'll have it show by customer. Okay. All right. So out of the box, if you're a nonprofit, we provision the system with what they call a quick start template for nonprofits. There's also several for profits. So what that allows us to do at the beginning is have some working reports. So here's my chart of accounts. And this is a window where I set up my cash account. And we've got these categories here. This field's called quick start category. And it's a list of about 50 categories that are used to produce canned financial reports. There are the quick start NFP template comes with 42, I believe it is, predefined reports in this report library. And so basically you can see here that I've got 990 statement of revenue, functional expenses, 117 and 958. So you can have these reports functioning out of the box by simply tagging your GL accounts with the appropriate categories. Okay, and so for example, let's see, I think I have a compliance dashboard here. You can see that various reports flowing through. In addition to filtering by dimensions, now you notice that I don't have the department or fund or whatever filters that I had on the other dashboard, but I do have a date filter. And one of the things that no other competitor does is allow you to do this, and that is change the date and then apply the filter. And get as of reports back at any date and time. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the pain of the month-end closing for a nonprofit who needs to report on grants each month. That is typically one of the biggest pain points we see. So I've got a little dashboard that I've called month-end grant position. And so my idea here was that I want to be able to work grant by grant and fill out my paperwork. A lot of times, one of the exercises is to look to see if I've exceeded budget anywhere. And if I have, maybe I can move some dollars around to different categories or different grants. So what I've got here is a financial report, which is giving me, let me just pop this out so you can see it. All right, so I've got my revenue, my expenditures, my budget, and then where I am against my budget for the month. Then I've got a detailed general ledger for this single grant. And again, if I go to a different grant, if I go to 402 and apply this, this is all going to regenerate for that grant. Hopefully over here, what we try to do is develop a functional expense report in the format that your grantor or whoever you need to report to, everybody's got their own way they want to see it. You know, you can't just use your financial groupings necessarily. So we try as much as possible to create individual reports for each grant that lays out the information that you need to provide to get to report or get reimbursed for that grant. Let's go back here and let's click apply here. And again, this is all drillable. Another item that Intacct does very well is encumbrance accounting. So I'm going to expand this out. One of the most common ways that we get a new nonprofit client is because they can't stay in budget. Either they don't have reporting. It's not because they can't stay, they can't see where they are. One of the biggest problems there is, okay, I run my actuals and I'm in budget, but Bob over here has got a PO out for $10,000 that's below the budget by $9,000. I don't have any visibility of that. That's called commitment accounting, encumbrance accounting in your textbooks. But here we have an example of, I've got actual, I've got my budget, I've got actual, but this number is on a PO. Okay, one of the things that Intacct does is allow you to do what they call custom books. So what we've done is we've created a commitment book, which is essentially a parallel general ledger, because this is not GAAP. You can't report to banks and authorities with commitments, but we've got this parallel general ledger. So if I drill down on this 49,000 here, it's the same kind of drill down we've had. I can see all the transactions that make that 49,000. But this 15,000, for example, this is a purchase order. Okay, so if I drill down far enough, you can see it's in my commitment book. And if I drill all the way down, I see that it's a purchase order. Actually, one more drill down, and it is a purchase order. This purchase order has actually generated debits and credits. It is debited expense and it's credited AP, but in a side ledger that I have incorporated into that report. When we receive the actual bill and post the invoice, the vendor invoice, it will reverse the entry in the commitment book and rebook it as an actual like any other accounts payable. So while that's not specifically nonprofit, 9 out of 10 people who do commitment accounting or encumbrance accounting do it for that reason, so that I can see what I've spent and what I have left, including purchase orders. All right, along the lines of staying in budget, we do have another tool that I want to touch on, and it is called spend management. And so basically here I've got this is just another AP invoice. But I have, this is an option. So far everything I've shown you is part of the core product. This is an additional little feature that is part of Sage's offering. It's called spend management. And what it does is it allows me to put my cursor on the line, because there could be more than one line here, and show the spend insight. All right. And so what it will show me is, for this particular combination of account, department, whatever level I'm budgeting at, it shows me what my budget is, what my actual is. So it appears that I'm just under budget, but au contraire, somebody's got a $5,000 PO out there. Then when you add in this transaction, I'm way over budget. Okay. Now, when we configure this, obviously you need a budget. What typically people do is people will have an annual operating plan that they have at the beginning of the year that is not sufficiently granular for this. But then they'll have a grant-based budget, another budget, which gets down into the nitty-gritty of each grant. And maybe some grants, but not all grants. You guys do this with projects. They do exactly the same thing on projects. They do plumbing, and basically they'll have a project and the various parts, and they enter a budget. They do big construction projects, not come fix your faucet. And so, you know, they have an initial estimate that tells them what they think it's going to be, job by job, item by item. And then they don't use spend management, but they do compare actual to budget. But what the spend management will do is when the user goes in to enter, to submit or post the transaction, they get this, here we have it set to a notification. So what I'm getting here is a warning up here that I'm exceeding a budget. So we can configure it to either not allow you to exceed or give the user a budget. So one of the things we often do is we stop them, we make this and we make them essentially convert this into a different type of transaction that has to be routed to somebody for approval to exceed the budget. Anyway, so spend management, and you turn on where you want that to work. So it can work just in AP, it can work in GL and AP. What am I doing?
Purchase order or just when you're entering the bill?
Purchase order. Yeah, this is a purchase order. So yeah, at the purchase order level, that's typically where you get in trouble is purchase orders. You aren't so visible. And again, they're two separate things. The encumbrance just gives you visibility to purchase orders, and this you just screen by screen tell it whether it needs to check what's entered in this screen to see if it's exceeding a budget. Because a lot of times you don't force it, you don't enforce it in general ledger because it's the accounting staff is doing general ledger, and hopefully they know what they're doing. But it's the people, the project people. You stop them from going over budget, or at least let them know that it's happening.
And this would be available to those employee users that you mentioned earlier that might only have the view access?
Right now, an employee user, I said earlier, is read only. There's actually,
Right.
excuse me, there's actually two exceptions to that.
Okay.
Exception one, which is extremely common, is they can enter purchase orders. And they can approve purchase orders. They can actually be in any approval process, but the only thing that they can create is a purchase order and a time card. But a time card has nothing to do with payroll. It has to do with charging standard hours into a project. So in theory, there's two things they can do: time cards and purchase orders. I don't think we have anybody doing, we only have a couple people doing time cards. We have lots of people doing purchase orders. One, it allows them to log approval. In probably 8 out of 10 nonprofits, when they use the approval workflows, they're actually approving things, they're logging approval of things that have already happened. Rather than actually getting blessing to do it. I see some heads nodding, but you can actually allow them to enter their invoice and have it routed and get it blessed by whoever needs to bless it. And then the auditors can see that this was an approved transaction. All right, so do we have anybody here who does restriction release? Restricted funds. Right, so, okay, so this is for you. So this is the one thing that is truly nonprofit specific. And we have a feature that basically says enable automatic restriction release. And believe it or not, there's a dashboard for this that I have created, and that is restrictions. All right. So I built this little dashboard to follow a simple life cycle of, so this is a financial report. This is a general ledger. So right now what I've got is I have received $100,000 for this grant 888. So it's debit cash, credit grant income, but it's restricted. And I actually have a dimension. If I go into edit mode, I actually am using one of my dimensions to track restrictions: permanent, temporary, unrestricted, and restricted. Okay? So this is temporarily restricted. Okay. All right. So, and I have this, and so we received these funds on January 1st, 2023. So I have $100,000 of restricted funds. Now I'm going to start spending that money. So I'm going to actually move this dashboard forward a couple, 3 weeks. Now we're going to look at the general ledger. We're going to see that I've spent some money. So remember, this was grant 888. I've got this dashboard hard coded to that grant rather than filtered to it. So let's drill in on this accounts payable entry. So this is the key thing. Again, this is an accounts payable bill. And it is coded, this expense is coded, among other things, it's coded to the grant. Okay, so my $100,000 grant was coded to 888. Now I've got an expense coded to 8. We'll click to pull myself out. Me. All right, so let's try that again. All right, so now I've got $38,000 worth of funds that need to be released or reclassified from restricted revenue to unrestricted revenue. And if you're doing this at scale with lots of grants every month, it can be an enormous amount of work. So we've got a feature called restriction release process, all right? And in a nutshell, what we're going to do here is we're going to say, I want to look through my 01/31/23, all right? And I want to release, I want to look for expenses that have this category and revenue that has this category. I want to go find those expenses for this particular grant, which is 888. Okay. All right. So in a nutshell, it's a one-click thing, or two in this case. Pick my grant, pick my date. I generate the release. And so this is going through grant by grant, or in this case, this grant for the month of January, and it's looking for expenses that are coded to 888, because whatever expenses have been coded to 888, that's what my revenue release is. So this is going to grind for a minute and pass the test. So I can see that it has calculated this journal entry to release the restrictions. So you can see that my account hasn't changed here. It's all 4,900, but I'm reclassifying from temporarily restricted into unrestricted. Okay. Now, if I go back to look at my dashboard, and I go all the way to the end of the month, which is what I dated that entry on, now we can see that I've got, or again, this is all hard coded to that one grant. So now I can see that I've got temporarily restricted funds remaining of 61,000 because I just released 38,000. And if I don't like that entry for some reason, I can delete it and run it again. Any questions on that? It's pretty powerful if you need it. If you're not a nonprofit, you don't need it. But all right, our last topic right on time is allocations. Okay, now we have two kinds of allocations. When I do a journal entry, a lot of accounting systems have this. So if I do a journal entry, and I've actually got a column in here called allocation. And so if I pick a predefined allocation such as, I don't know, facilities, what it's going to do, it's going to split $4,500 out by by however this was defined. But what we're talking about is a month-end process where typical scenario is I accumulate a pool of G&A type expenses into shared services. I don't charge it to my individual programs because what my agreement with my funders is the most recent one I did is I've got like 137 G&A accounts that I code into a department called shared services rather than I don't charge it directly to my programs. Then at the end, but I do charge my payroll into my programs. Then the way my grants agreements are written is I can allocate that G&A across my programs based on however much payroll salaries they have that month. And so for this particular client, it's 137 allocations because it's account by account, which can be run with a single click. And all of those expenses get moved out of shared services into the various grants, but they maintain utilities versus insurance versus office supplies, whatever. So now across each of my programs, grants, whichever dimensions I choose to use, I've got an allocation that I can support from an audit standpoint. I did it with one click and I didn't have to allocate anything manually. So the setup screen for that is actually pretty complicated to get set up. So I got a dashboard here to kind of show us the results of a couple of different scenarios. So in this scenario, this column are my salaries for the month. Okay. This column is my fringe benefits for the month before allocation. So once I run the allocation process took this 8,000, spread it by the proportional amount of salaries. So this is kind of the scenario I just described, except this is using departments. So basically, whatever percentage of 6,000 is into 26.5, that fraction times 8,000 is what counseling service got for their allocation. So in this particular case, taking one set of numbers, the 8,000 account balances, allocating them to another set of accounts, fringe, but in other departments based on my salaries balances for the month, or it could be year to date. The other scenario I have is pretty close to the same thing, and that is during the month. So this is all dues and subscriptions. So for whatever reason, during the month, I've accumulated $3,000 worth of dues and subscriptions, and they've all been coded into counseling services. But I'm going to reallocate those by head count. So down here, I've got a statistical account, which allows me to record numbers. It can be head count, floor space, number of children served, muster, number of orders processed, whatever. But in this particular case, I've got a head count allocation here. So basically, same process is when the process runs, it takes the 3,000 and allocates it back out. Now, counseling services happens to have 22% of the head count, so it's not all coming out. But basically, you can see that this is the proof of the weightings. So this is the weight of the 3,000, and here is my head count. All right, and that's pretty much what I was going to cover. One thing that I didn't touch on since I mentioned these statistical accounts is let's take a quick look at one more dashboard. That would be, and let's go with standard NFP. So basically, here's an example of where we're storing numbers, client served, meal served, volunteer hours, so on and so forth. But one of the things that I can do with that is with my clients served, I can bring that down here on this program expenses and divide out my clients served by my total expenses to get my cost per client. That's really the primary purpose of using those statistical accounts. I've run 2 minutes over. You have plenty of time for questions, either in the room or from people joining remotely. Sir?
I'm interested a lot in the financial report writer that you covered. And you mentioned that there was, I think, something kind of standard reports. We have a very specific result that we kind of like. However, it's cumbersome to get there. So I'm curious about the flexibility within that beyond 42 standard. So if you could speak to that.
Yeah, so the question is the standard reports and the standard categories. Those are nice if they work for you. And they're useless if they don't. So
my guess is they might not work.
And that is often the case. That is often the case, especially in for-profit environments. But in that case, you just build your reports using account numbers. So having report based, maybe a balance sheet. Balance sheets tend to be a little more vanilla. It's typically in the P&L where people get to more custom presentations. But maybe the balance sheet may be of some use, but yes, if you can't create your own category, so it is what it is. You basically go down your chart of accounts and whatever category fits best, that's your category and that's it. People who have very specific reporting requirements, we don't even incorporate the template because it's just noise. It's just stuff mixed in with our regular stuff. So it is very easy to build reports based on account range. So you would do what you need to do based on account number.
If I could follow up, can you do that using some combination of the 4-digit account number that you mentioned in conjunction with, funds, departments? Is that possible?
Yes, it is absolutely possible. And there is a myriad of ways to approach that. I've got a good time. I've got a lot of experience with a lot of financial report writers, and I haven't seen any that has the flexibility and speed of development. You saw how I ran the columns out like that. You can filter columns, you can filter lines. It is very easy to create a base set of, typically what you do is you create a row layout based on account numbers. And then you start applying filters to either the entire report or various columns in it. But you can do things such as, rather than having account numbers down the side, you could have grants for your rows and then revenue, expense, balance as your columns. So it's such a broad topic, it's hard to even begin to touch on it, but you would have a very difficult time coming up with a scenario that couldn't be done fairly easy. And I'd be happy to explore that more with you specifics offline, but.
And I understand it's a question that's very specific to our circumstances, so I understand.
But the base question is, if the categories and predefined reports don't work for you, then you just don't use them and you build them on account and other dimension strings. If you're a nonprofit, you start out with 9 dimensions. If you're a for-profit, you end up with 7 dimensions. They do that just because nonprofits typically have this grant and fund type distinction. But if you can't get it done in 7 dimensions, you're probably going too hard. Thinking too hard. All of these reports go out to Excel very nicely, formatted. Casey, you have any questions on the board there on the chat?
Not so far. Anybody on chat have a question?
All right, well, that was either,
I think it was a no. I actually just went into the team room and double checked the chat to make sure that nobody was asking a question on the chat. And that little question, the little red dot up there is me saying any questions.
so that was either extremely thorough or extremely boring. I'll go with thorough. All right,
Jean, did you have any questions? That's down.
We have another one. Blanca's a little shyer than I am, so I'll see if I can do her question justice.
Sure.
Using, if you have an outside payroll process, I'm assuming that through some automated data interchange function, you could get the raw data here and then play with it and maybe even get a standard journal entry that would post. And again, maybe I'm being too specific for
no,
us.
not at all. As a matter of fact, that's kind of this slide. So you notice our friends ADP here, for
Right.
example.
Right.
We've got Workforce Go. We've got a couple of folks from ADP who'd be very happy to talk to you today if you'd like. But Intacct calls their solution a best of breed solution. And by that, what they mean is competitor who shall remain unnamed tries to provide everything to everyone. So they end up with a pretty good general ledger, maybe a good AP, but you start getting down to the fringe and the modules start getting thinner and thinner and crappier and crappier. Intacct is not going to try to reinvent the payroll wheel. It's been done. There's a dozen different AP or payroll systems that integrate into Intacct. And those that don't integrate directly, it's a very easy file import. Likewise, CRM, been there, done that. Somebody's done that. So they've created an API that they have made as easy as possible to use. They want people to be able to integrate. So
They being
Sage. Okay. As a matter of fact, they've taken that to the extreme. Not to the extreme, but to show their commitment to that. Okay. This is the Sage marketplace. It's marketplace.intacct.com. Okay. If you go to this link, you will see many different vendors of many different solutions. One thing they all have in common is they have all submitted their code to Sage, who has tested their code and says, okay, this passes muster. Now you sign a service agreement with us that when there's a problem with your integration, you fix it immediately at your expense, not the customer's. So if you go to, now I don't know the specific of this, but I would assume that if you go to Microsoft and look at their, whatever the equivalent is, it's going to be anybody who had the $1,000 to put up and get their name here. You can't buy your way in here. So this is by no means, and there are some very good integrations. ServiceTight is these guys use the most, probably the most amazing integration I've ever seen is ServiceTight. That thing is unbelievably robust. They're not on here. So it's not an exclusive list, but anything that you see here, you know that Sage has vetted their code and that they have an agreement that problems with the integration are not yours. And if I go to payroll,
Who do you use it for payroll?
paid for.
so basically you can see we've got a number of various solutions. Paycor isn't one of them, so that would be a flat file.
So ADP does have, if you don't mind me.
You bet.
ADP does have a pre-built API that integrates with Sage Intacct. ADP is named the payroll provider for Intacct customers. So the service is second to none.
Yeah, there's some slides in here, maybe not on this site, but basically if you look at the product catalog, it's Sage or Intacct Payroll powered by ADP. So it really is just ADP
Right.
rebranded, and we've got our own particular group of implementers.
Service people just service our customers. have teeth, which is unusual.
And then there are a couple options if you want to do your payroll in-house. Why you want to do that, I don't know. But if you want to do it in-house, there is an option for that. When I was my second job out of college, one of the things that came under my domain was payroll. In fact, longer than I'd like to say, but the late payment for a late tax deposit was more than my annual salary. Why you want to mess with that? Let ADP do it.
Did you say, so you're using Paycor, do you utilize the API or is it just flat?
Typically, if you're not doing project work, then the only integration is really the journal entry bills. Now, if you're down into project accounting, which is one of Sage's strong suits, it will sync people and post things down at the people and level range, which you can actually still do. So you could post it's still just a journal entry basically. So it's not a real heavy lift.
And Jim, when you say project accounting, that would apply to grants and allocating for grants as well, right?
What was that, Casey?
Could project accounting also apply to grants, like allocating for grants with your payroll?
Correct. So yeah, so in any payroll system, basically on each person and or each pay type, you need to hang what the general ledger account is. Typically, okay, this pay type goes to this salary account and this person goes to this part, and this project goes to this project. So it's pretty straightforward, and you can import anything into literally anything in the core product. You can import vendors, customers, journal entries, purchase orders from Excel. You go to a window and it'll spit out an Excel template that you need to use, and you don't have to map anything. It uses the headings.
So we would just upload the Excel file.
Yeah, what you'd want to do, if you wanted to stay on Paycor, then you'd want to go in and you might end up with a different chart of accounts and department scheme. So you need to redo that in Paycor, but then their standard entry would spit out. It's pretty light lift to get it imported.
So it does also AP and runs checks?
The system?
Yeah.
It's an app. It's a full accounting. The core system comes with obviously general ledger, a cash management module, AP, AR, order processing, purchase order processing, some approval workflows, some OCR capabilities for scanning AP invoices.
Is there a function of the AP module or something that you're aware of that could be an add-on to do remote invoice approval of some sort?
Yes. So
Okay.
yes, there are numerous solutions that do that. There is some functionality in Intacct. It does have an approval workflow. People who are really basing their decision on how good that workflow is, we got to talk. If that's really what it's kind of C+ approval within Intacct, but there are some A+ solutions that we recommend. Where people,
Okay.
even within Intacct, you can approve when somebody gets something routed to them. They can approve it on their phone. Like they can actually open the invoice. They can see the attachment. They can approve it on their phone.
What you just said speaks to my question. So
Yeah.
And when we get there, we can do demos for you more specifically around specific needs. We just need to have a conversation about where you want to go and how deep you want to do it. And then we can show you demos specifically to those needs.
I'm sorry for dragging you the rest of the problems.
We're just not sharing.
Jean's just taking it all in. This is our first toe in the Sage Intacct world. So And buyer, you have been there for a while, so it's always great. We love to have people that have been on it, people that are looking to be on it, Morgans, and then the Jay, who was just like opening their eyes and saying, maybe this is something we might want to go into the cloud. So it's nice to have like different levels of where we are in the system to know, like, to have these conversations. So that's what we're happy you're all here.
Having done numerous accounting systems over the many years, this is as much fun as doing accounting gets. It's pretty easy to create sizzle.
So you guys had questions on the interactive, like,
Well, yeah, the interactive, the visuals, all the pretty stuff, you know. I like the forecasting and all that kind of stuff.
The interactive visual explorer.
Yeah, we're just getting into the custom report writer.
Okay.
You know, I was talking to Jackie about SQL and, you know, writing in SQL and, you know, because using the different, if I want to use AP and AR and putting those together. And so anyways, you can get pretty granular. You can do anything you want. You know,
Yeah.
it does cost a little bit more each time you add something. But
So
so the service type,
yeah,
we're like,
yeah,
needs to do that.
the standard package comes with the very cool financial report writer.
Get a lot of it.
And then it also comes what they call a custom report writer, which allows you to get any information you want in the system. But it doesn't do much in the way of math. Basically, you can get totals. You can get lists with totals. Now you can get to anything, which is cool because you can get to all your data, but it's lists with totals. Then what she's talking about is there's a reporter called interactive visual report writer, which the complexity of the name is only surpassed by how hard it is to use. It is not for the typical staff account. It's does the job, but it's pretty complex. But there's a visual explorer, which is a graph builder. It's pretty cool. It's kind of drag and drop, and there you can create some really good charts and graphs and tables.
Sometimes at the higher level, you just want to say that dashboard. Show me the snip, and then, you know, so getting there. And then also the AP automation, still waiting to hear more about that. I thought they were gonna have a bunch of that at Transform, but they didn't really do much on that. They're on their specific, you do all these, you know, APIs into them. We have Stamply, but they didn't do their specific ones. I know that they have one, because one of the things we talk about is I have to go into Sage and then I have to click and get back to the invoice. Well, if you don't have a login to Stamply, my brother claims he doesn't, then he's like, I can't see the invoice. I can't see the invoice. But
Yeah,
so
that's
in their AP, they have a specific one that they're waiting for the ability to pull it in and read the PO with AI.
So
I'm surprised they
who
haven't.
is Stamply?
yeah.
Stamply's are,
Stamply is a competitor to use and to
Yeah.
several of the other marketplace partners
Okay.
that provide AP automation. So
Yeah,
our
the
preferred one is a company called Use.
Okay.
We have clients who use Stamply. Most of them have some daily frustration with them, so we don't usually promote that.
Right.
The
It
big-
just depends on what you're looking for.
What she's describing is that with Stamply, with Bill.com and some others, when you scan the image stays in their system.
Yeah.
And so her problem is if the person in the accounting system doesn't also have a Stamply user, they can't jump to the image. Some of the others, like our preferred one, Use, it puts the image in their system and in Intacct, where Intacct would have put it had you started there, so that if you part ways with them later, you still have the images. Now, in all fairness, you guys are kind of locked into Stamply for now because of a uniqueness to, I don't know if you're aware of this, but you know, Service Titan sends the PO number in. No, they don't.
ish.
They send that funky number of theirs in. And so what Stamply did for you was actually write a custom piece of code to make it look in that reference field for the PO number. So while they're not our preferred solution, gave you guys a big solid there, and unless
I mean, we'll stay with them
Let's do it, yeah.
until, you know.
even with Sage, you know, when theirs comes along, the problem is service time's still sticking the PO, or isn't using the PO number that the vendor's seen. So I'm bet Sage ain't gonna custom write that. They're
Well, not would, yeah.
Yeah,
that's-
you
would.
yeah,
You
used
could
would,
do it.
but yeah, I wouldn't, if you're holding out as the Intact offering being a substitute for Stamply, I suspect not, because of the fact that until you can get service titan to put the PO number in the PO field.
They were pretty non-compliant when we granted them for that, if I remember correctly.
I don't know
So,
about that, they just didn't care.
well,
Well, they're a very big operation, and when you start putting customs into your coding for a particular client, now you have another code base to maintain, and I really digress.
Well, we're a few steps back down the path from where you are, but it's interesting to hear about your challenges there.
There's always gonna be challenges, and it's just a matter of figuring out.
So if you do shop AP automation, you want one, there's lots of choices. Two things you need to look for is not all of them integrate to purchase orders. Bill.com in particular. If you got a purchase order out there, it'll just create a duplicate transaction. The other is, does it put the image in your system or their system? Both. Both is good. There's only not so much, because
when you get to that place, have us at the table, because we see stuff that you may not need to ask because we've seen other clients with
Sure.
challenges.
I'm happy to hang around and delve into deeper topics. If anybody would like to,
We'll just have some
or have.
beverages and some yummy food, or all of the above.
So thank you, everybody who joined us online, and thank you, everybody, for joining us here. If you guys are online and have any questions, we are happy to just email us and let us know, or just reach out to Casey, Jim, or myself. But thank you all for joining us, and we will send you a link of the meeting. Have a good day, everybody.